Andrew Hauser joins me to talk human performance. Andrew is an athletic trainer, strength coach, and the owner of Continuum High Performance, where he focuses on rehab and performance training. A veteran of 4 major league clubs, Andrew's worked closely with some of the best athletes on the planet. And as someone who lost a leg in a life-threatening car crash, Andrew can also offer a unique perspective on overcoming adversity. Andrew, good to see you.
Great to see you.
All right, we're off to a hot start. So I heard a good question the other day. I'm gonna steal it for our purposes here. Who is the best movie villain in your opinion?
Oh, that is a really good question.
Yeah, I thought so.
You could go a lot of different ways with this. Man, my thought. Oh, I mean, it's got to be the Emperor in Star Wars, right?
It's a solid answer.
Yeah.
I don't know if it has to be, but it's a solid answer.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess there's no rule to this question. Yeah, I think I would have to go with the Emperor personally, and the fact that he reappeared in these new ones.
Yeah, see, I haven't seen any of the new ones, and it's been years since I saw the original ones. But I feel like that's pretty. Now I do. Well, I do now. But I feel like that's a pretty. Yeah, spoiler alert. I feel like that's a pretty timeless answer. So I'll get that's solid. I went with Hannibal Lecter.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And he's interesting because it's like, is he helping?
Exactly. Right. Is he a villain? I don't know. Then again, he eats people's faces, so I think that's sort of usually the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
face eating tends to be frowned upon.
I oddly like horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like Val will not watch horror movies with me, so anytime I'm on the road, that's when I usually watch horror movies. The people next to me on planes probably think like this guy's a sociopath. Yeah, I think I'd still stick with my answer. The Emperor from Star Wars.
Fair enough. So how long did you spend in affiliated professional baseball?
Like 15 years.
Did you?
So, strength coach, athletic trainer, and then, do a little bit of everything in Atlanta. So
head performance guru.
Yeah. Which that was my dream job in team sports. Like that's what I wanted to do. A lot of the big picture things, which obviously we can discuss as we go. And then in LA, I was like the rehab director, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
So 15 years, did a lot of hats, a lot of time on the road, a lot of time on the phone.
Yeah. So what led you down that path? Like, what made you decide you wanted to make that your career?
Yeah. No. So let's see. I honestly, like, going into college, I had no clue. Like, I got in a car accident. Just gloss over that for a minute, but I just thought, like, okay, I'm just gonna go to school, play baseball, figure that out. And then I went to PT. I was like, well, this kind of sucks. and then I started seeing an athletic trainer, which I thought was strength conditioning. Like that's what it was to me, and that's how they trained me. I was like, oh, this is a job. Like, yeah, like I want to do that. I want to do that. Right. And then I got into the program. I was like, you have to do all these hours and whatnot. I was like, well, I don't know. I'm in too deep now.
This also sucks.
Yeah. But I started, like, the people I always gravitated towards and that I've really been mentored by throughout my entire career were very much like big picture thinkers. So it was never like rehab and therapy. Like that wasn't like its own thing or silo. It was, this is like we're training, we're treating, everything is part of, like, they're just puzzle pieces that are part of it.
Very holistic approach.
Yeah. And honestly, like, that was cool. Like, even in college, I know, like, the guy that I spent most of my time under he was like a college basketball strength coach before he was a head trainer. So it's like everybody, I mean, that's how Ken was, who would be my number one professional mentor for sure. Everybody just saw the bigger picture from that aspect. And that for me was like, I never knew, did I want to be a strength coach? Did I want to be, more on the medical side? Like the answer really was always kind of staring me in the face. Both. It wasn't different. And those are the people like in Atlanta, just as an example, like the people I wanted to hire were thinkers like that. And really like I wanted a strength coach that he could pop in and work on somebody if he needed to in a pinch. So they'd have licensure and the ability to do that. And same thing with the medical staff, like to be able to, you should be able to take a guy through a training session in the weight room. You should be able to take guys through the warm up out on the field. Like you have your primary responsibilities, but being able to step in when need be.
Sure. Yeah, and understanding that and the team mentality too, right? The willingness, not just the ability to do it, but like the willingness and the appetite to do it.
Which is hard to find. I mean that in and of itself led down a lot of paths. I know you've talked to like Ryan Maid on the podcast before. The relationship with him and his ability to help us tailor like just a better interview process was unbelievable. And I mean that's one of the things he's super passionate about. But that really started to change my perspective. On like when I was in Arizona, they do an unbelievable job of interviewing, but then it was like taking that and trying to build a totally new dimension into that. Yeah. And that's where I think Ryan came in. I mean, you get good people. Don't be an idiot. Listen to them.
Yeah. No, you know what? Ken's a great example. He's a guy that Ken Crenshaw in Arizona. I always had a tremendous amount of respect for because he, as much as probably anybody I've been around, everybody says you want to hire people that are going to take your job someday, right? You want to train your replacement and all that. And it's kind of just hot air for a lot of folks. But he actually lived it, and it was very intentional. I remember talking about hiring you away from another club years ago, when you were in like A-ball or something. And he had made a connection with you years ago, and he's like, yeah, look, this guy's kind of green, but he's really talented, and he could fit. He already had it like mapped out in his head, and so I always appreciated that. And it was, obviously that group, that population doesn't get a lot of attention or fanfare, right? Unless the team is ravaged by injuries, then you guys get thrown under the bus. Or as we saw like with DeMar Hamlin in Buffalo, right? Like he got rightfully. It was cool to see somebody getting some kudos for, and I think I wrote something about it at the time because I've been around people like yourself who incredibly talented, committed, selfless, and nobody really cares, right? Like the players care, the staff cares, the organization cares tremendously, but on the outside they're like, this guy, those are the Advil and tape guys. Like they just go, rub some hamstrings up and go get them. Nobody has any idea. And so it was really cool to see that that passion, that commitment from Ken's perspective, the staff he built out, yourself included. And I know that you wanted to kind of bring that with you to Atlanta, which is a big task because you can't just copy paste. You've got to kind of make that your own. And we had our own set of challenges and things like that you would in any organization. But I want to go back to what sort of spawned the interest, right? The exposure to PT, the exposure to athletic training was your accident. And you and I haven't talked a ton about that in the past. I've got some sort of funny anecdotes about it, ironically. Like one of the first few times I met you, and I'll throw him under the bus in this story, but this is when we were in Atlanta, and Jeff Francoeur was in the clubhouse, and you kind of walked in one day, and I had known you for years before I honestly even figured out that you had a prosthetic leg, and you kind of had a little bit of a subtle limp, right, that morning, something where Jeff picked up on it, and true friend. Yeah, of course, he doesn't miss a beat. But in true Frenchie fashion, he starts giving you some grief, and all you did, and you were wearing like some training pants or something, you just lifted it up and showed him, and he just turned like 9 shades of red, and just like it's hard to stop that guy in his tracks, and you stopped him. And I always just appreciated the way you handled it, and how you I literally didn't know for a good while after I had met you that you had that history. So just talk to me a little bit about the accident and kind of how it led you down that path.
And Jeff Francoeur and all his.
Yeah, right.
We should mention his. We had dinner with him that one time in Miami. I remember, and I think he ate an entire block of cheese. I've never seen a kid that like this.
I wasn't even mad. I was just impressed.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was 18 years old. It was actually 20th anniversary was beginning of this month. Actually, like of when it happened.
Wow.
Yeah, it was June 1st. I graduated high school like 3 days before. That was literally, it was the night we got back from our state baseball tournament. I was driving home, and my wife and I were actually talking about this recently because I vividly remember, I was like, man, I'm tired. I was probably 10, 15 minutes from my house. I was like, I am so tired. I was calling random people just to see like, hey, can I just like crash on your couch? Like, I remember doing that. And then like, okay, everybody was asleep. It was probably like 2 a.m. Yeah, I lived kind of out in the country, in about using like Arrowhead Stadium or Kauffman Stadium as just our point jumping off line. It was probably like 45 minutes south, from there. Driving home, I fell asleep at the wheel, heard my tires on the side of the road, woke me up. I overcorrected, ended up in a ditch, and the ditch took me into a telephone pole. The pole itself landed on my lap, so I compound fractured my femur. It's somehow, I don't know really how, but however I hit it, it had wrapped the door around my leg, and like it amputated it on site.
Oh
I don't really remember that. Like I remember the pole on my leg. I remember talking to the firefighters. Like a couple happened to take the long way home after seeing a late movie or something. Found me. I mean, quickly I would have bled out. I remember like looking at my femur and all the blood, and just like trying to put pressure on my leg, trying to figure out a way to get out. And then like I remember moving my foot, like my right foot. I had like jeans and sandals on, and it was the early 2000s. It was the look. I tried to move my left foot, and like I'm looking at it, it didn't look any different, and it wouldn't move. And like I didn't really know what was happening, but like I went into shock at that point. I briefly remember getting on like the life flight. They life flighted me out of there.
Yeah.
And I woke up the next afternoon, strapped down to a hospital bed. Like I remember my dad was in the room. And that was like the first thing I asked him was like, is my leg gone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they said, the people at the hospital said people usually know when it does happen, but that's how I started the summer going into my first year of college.
Golly, man.
And honestly, in retrospect, I wouldn't change it. Like I was kind of arrogant. I was doing some stupid stuff. I mean, I know 18-year-old kids do a lot of stupid stuff. And I think some people just need a more aggressive shove to kind of push them down a path maybe. Obviously, yeah, it'd be nice to have your leg still.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't, like the lessons I learned far outweigh being able to still have it.
Wow.
And continue to. Like, I mean, I'm a father now, so I think being able to pass on. And now I know the nonsense I was up to, so I'll probably be way more strict, especially.
Oh yeah, yeah, right. They'll have new tricks by the time you got to deal with it though.
Yeah, no, I know. But I mean, it really did. Like, it was immediate. Like, I knew, like, I'm so happy to be alive. And then like friends and family, like you saw who were like really close friends and like who really cared about you. And some of those things, even at that time, like I probably pushed away some of the people that did care about me, retrospectively, but, your family was, there for everything. Yeah. And it was, I mean, I was pretty much on bed rest for 3 months. I mean, not 3 months, like 3 weeks. And then like I got out of the hospital after about 2 weeks. I was, yeah, more or less bed rest for another 3 weeks. And then I started walking with crutches after that. And I mean, I was on crutches for until that was June 1st when the accident happened. I was on crutches until like mid-November almost. So they wait for all the, especially a traumatic injury, but they wait for all like the swelling to essentially go out of your limb before you start walking, like get fit and everything and start walking. So I didn't walk like once I started walking, that all happened pretty quickly. I think the benefit of being an 18-year-old athlete. So
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, I went from like I was probably 205 at the time of the accident. I was 155 when I started walking.
Wow.
So, I mean, granted,
Just
I'm
from
the lower part of my leg, but you know, that's 10 to 15 pounds. That's not.
Yeah.
So it's just like it totally.
Just atrophy.
Just just survival at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, an 18-year-old athlete, you know, I mean, 18-year-old kid, period, but especially like, you know, an athlete's mindset. It's like, yeah, it probably served you really well in the recovery, but it also, and you've got the perspective on it now of, you know, being grateful for, which, you know, look, I love. I try to embrace that myself, but because it clearly shaped who you are now, right? It's to shape the person you are, the husband, the father, all that. But that's got to be a huge blow to the psyche, to the ego, to, you know, everything. Because that's, I mean, I know when I was 18 and I still remember my last college game, you know, like that's who you are. That's your identity, you know, and then for that to be taken away from you, you know, almost like without you realizing, like it happened and you wake up and you're like, now you're, for all intents and purposes, a different person with respect to what to go for. It's like, that had to be hard. I mean, to say it's hard is like stupid and trite, but like, tell me about kind of what you were going through.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, and I think I've even appreciated that more as the years have gone on, because I like, and this is where like I say like I'm lucky, because that is like I just associated myself with being an athlete, and that was it. It's like I didn't know who I was beyond there. Like I thought I was, you know, like have a good time, and you know, you try to be the life of the party at that age, I think. But being able to stop and say like, no, this isn't who I am as an athlete was, yeah, I knew I wasn't that person anymore. I knew I couldn't, at least when it happened. I had in my head, I was like, I think I could come back and play. But it's like as the months went by, not that I didn't like that just didn't seem as important anymore, which was different for me. So it was a good break from. That's all I knew. That's all I ever thought about growing up, really. And now I see that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, as I've gotten older now, especially at the top level of sport. I mean, in the major leagues, or I see it with a lot of other pro sports now too. A lot of athletes go through that late in their career, and I think that's why you see so many athletes struggle when they do, like when they retire, get released, whatever happens. I think they go through they're going through a similar process. Yeah, it wasn't like a traumatic injury, but they're going through the exact same thing mentally. Because that is, especially if you've been elite, that's like all you've known. People are always telling you how great you are at everything. You're getting paid to be great. And then it's like all the attention stops unless you go back for a day at the stadium that they throw for you and they retire your number. Okay, yeah, people recognize you, but it's funny. I mean, and you could empathize with this. Like, there's so many coaches that come back into pro sports that somebody always tells you, like, hey, they're in player mode still.
Yeah.
and it's like, like their psyche, to your point, like that hasn't changed at all. Like they still think that's where I think pro sports needs to put some attention. Like I know, like in the NFL, a lot of the concussion stuff's getting a lot more research and attention. but and mental health as a whole is getting more attention, but there really needs to be a better transition out of pro sports. And like, as whatever, as foo-foo as this may sound to people, like, people need to start trying to figure out who they are as themselves.
No, I think you're spot on. I think that's spot on. Like, there's the ego side of the attention and the fame and the money and all that, which, you know, there's trappings that'll suck anybody in, right? But there's also just a sense of self-worth of getting up and working out or going up and competing and, you know, doing anything at a high level. I imagine it's similar for, you know, surgeons or other people that are doing things that are physical. You know, it's got to be hard when, like, the skills back up to the point where you can't do that anymore, you know, and then it's like, okay, I can't do that. The paychecks aren't what they used to be or whatever. But it's also like, well, that was sort of my purpose. That's what I did. So what do I do now? And that's, I feel like, probably the hardest part. Like, the ego and the money, you're like, all right, dude, just get over yourself, right? But I can empathize more with, like, well, now what do I do? How am I useful now? Like, how much golf can I play, right? Like, what do I do? And I totally agree with it. And I think it's, you know, it's not as severe as, like, the military, but you hear it all the time. Guys transitioning out of the military that are career military people that just have trouble acclimating to the civilian world. And there's similarities there because just it's not the same. The world's not the same that you've been living in your whole life.
Yeah. Well, I think I had this conversation recently, actually, with my dad. So my dad retired early. He didn't have any hobbies. Like, he built his own business, you know, from nothing, and, like, he busted it, like, constantly. Like, I mean, he actually built his business out of our home when I was growing up, and, like, he was constantly working, and it's like he was able to retire early, and it really was that moment of, like, now what? And I think a lot of people in general have done that, especially that generation that's starting to come through. Like, they're starting to get to that retirement age, and the baby boomer generation before them. Like, that's just what you did. You just worked hard. You know, you saved money. You tried to take care of your family. A lot of people, I think, were miserable in their same job for a long time, but they just did it because that's what they did. And then they got to retirement age, and I think that's when I'm watching my father-in-law. Like, he was a orthopedic surgeon, retired within the last couple of years, and I see, like, that's where he did a really good job of, like, he had a lot of hobbies. He had a lot of things outside of, he wasn't just that person. Like, he had his family, he had his job, but, like, that was it. That was his job. He had these other things he liked to do and enjoy, and keep you stimulated. I really think that is a big part of it. They lose, and like, it's gotten better for my dad over the years. He still doesn't have a ton of hobbies, but, like, he's found at this point ways to keep himself stimulated. Yeah. And I think that's why you see so many. It's multifactorial, but I think that's why you see just people just give up after a while. You know, it's like, well, I don't really have that much to do. You know, family probably starts coming around more, or starts coming around less in some instances, and yeah, you become more and more detached from what you thought you were working for.
Yep.
And again, that's a long drawn out response, but pro sports, I think the retirement of pro sports, or just the whole stigma around this is who I am. We are not our job. You go to the winter meetings and you see, like, people just clinging on for dear life, you know. And it's going to be that way. I'm picking on it just because that's, like, what I know and what I've seen a lot of.
Right.
And no, like, I don't mean this offensively towards anyone, but you can see it in the room of so many people are just like, if they don't have that, they don't know what else they would do.
Yeah.
And that always stuck out to me. Of like, ooh, I know I'm not that. So it's like, how do you not let yourself then start to almost move back into that?
Yep. Yeah, I think you and I travel similar paths. You know, roughly around the same time as we were going through that, where we had conversations and had that sort of awareness that we didn't want that personally. And so how do you avoid it? And it's hard. That is an all consuming, like a lot of really appealing, competitive, visible industries. There's a lot, it's just an all consuming world that you live in. And so if you allow it to, it'll take your life over. And so, I didn't want that. And what you were touching on earlier about sort of getting out and now what, I sort of experienced that. I knew it was sort of time to do something different, but that's all I had done. That's all I had wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough to have some really good opportunities and do some things that I was proud of. But I'm like, for my sake and my family's sake, it's time to do something different. And it took me a while to figure out what that was going to be, and because anything that you do, similar, again, this is probably more akin to the athletes and the folks in the military who are in combat, high stress, high adrenaline, you sort of become addicted to that adrenaline, where anything I did next it was going to feel different. So for me, I had to shift what that felt like, what I was looking for, what was important, and I still needed to scratch that itch, right? There were still things I was passionate about. That's why I'm sitting here talking to you, right? Like, this is a fun project for me to sort of use as an outlet to, while it's not in technically sports, it's all those threads sort of tie back together. So I imagine you went through a similar sort of evolution as you got out of, affiliated pro baseball.
Yeah. That was, well, I know you and I talked off air, and I think a lot of people will empathize with this statement. Like, 2020 was the first time I thought, like, ooh, maybe it's time to get out. Like, you almost got to see a little bit of how the other half lived, because you weren't tied to your, even in baseball, it was only a month really that we had off, but it's like you weren't tied to your phone for that month. Yeah. Because even in the off seasons, I mean, in season, you pretty much got 9 months of just, balls to the wall. I mean, in season, it's 90 to 100 hours a week is pretty normal. And you don't think twice about it. But it's like off season, I mean, if in Atlanta, like, you're still working 60 hours a week probably. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like a downshift. When you're actually able to shut that off and kind of see that. And for me, like, I started noticing some other things too along the way. But it's been for me, it was like you're kind of betting on yourself, because staying in is almost the easy thing at that point. Yeah, because that is, 100%. And I'm sure you see that in the military. I'm sure there's a lot of enlistment, like re-enlistments, in those situations. And I've seen other people, they've gotten out for a year or two, and then they've gotten right back in. And you know what? Maybe that's what they want to do. That's totally fine. For me, I kept telling myself that, hey, that'd be the easy thing. So, I wanted to try to tackle something new, a new challenge. And again, like, I had kind of like that what next feeling, even when I was in Atlanta, like, okay, we're trying to build this, unicorn department almost. But like, what's, like, thinking from an individual perspective, like, where can we take this, and then what? And I remember when I got to LA, I was like, this just doesn't feel like, I knew pretty early when I was there. It's like, okay, this is nothing against the organization, but you also know, like, when something's not a fit. Yeah. And that's really where I was mentally. And then once those thoughts start happening, it just picks up more and more steam. And COVID definitely made that an aggressive shove. But now, like, transitioning into that, like, private space for me, like, it took, it's like you're going into cold water. Like, you're slowly, like like walking in. You're not, I don't know if I want to do this or not. Like, for me now, it's started to become, like, it's reinvigorated my spark for what got me passionate about doing all this stuff in the first place. And you start to see the other side of things, like, athletes don't always trust the staff with the team. When we talked about that online, and that is not a knock on the staff. That's just like, hey, you're employed by the organization, and players are usually pretty good about, like, they get it's a job, especially at the highest level. Like, it's a business, and so you start to see the other side of that, because when they seek you out in the private space, like, you have no ties unless they want you to speak to the organization. You have no contact with the club. But it's been the interesting piece of that has even been, like, they just want somebody they can trust. I feel like, I mean, they want high quality work. Don't get me wrong, but they're looking for somebody to listen to them, and that, as simple as that sounds, that's even that's the non-athlete space and the athlete space. Like, they feel like everybody's just telling them. They're either agreeing with them, or they're just telling them what they think they want, or telling them because, like, hey, I'm the doctor. Here's what's going on. Like, well, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Yeah, so people just don't feel like they're heard, which is a basic communication thing. And that kind of goes back to even Ken. That was one of the things he really was good at instilling in us when I was there, and I'm sure they've taken it much farther since. But I mean, that is a basic communication tenet. Like,
well, you think about it, it's you graduated from college, and unless you're going to grad school or you go to the military or whatever, someone's going to tell you what you're supposed to do. It's akin to someone telling you every day of your career what to do, with your career. And these athletes' bodies, particularly the ones that are a little bit more self-aware, maybe a little bit older and more experienced and have learned some things, they know, or at least have a sense of, like, what their body can do and can't do, and what works for them and what doesn't. And I understand that distrust, or at least the leeriness of, hey man, this is my career, this is my instrument, right? And, like, you're just going to tell me what to do. And I think that's why you were so effective at what you did and still do. But in our time together at the team perspective, and was folks could tell, players could tell that you had more going on in your life, than just, you weren't living and dying for the Braves, or the Diamondbacks, or the Dodgers, or whoever you were working with. Like, you were loyal, you were a good employee, you were trying to do right by the company and the player and everything, but you were just an authentic person, right? And like, that's where I think there's a disconnect when people just, you're just drinking the Kool-Aid, right? And you're saying whatever you're being a company man and saying whatever your bosses tell you to say. I don't blame them for that leeriness. So you've got to, I talk and think a lot about leadership on this show, and talk to a lot of people that have done some really interesting things. And your roles over the years isn't one that, like, jumps to mind when you think of leadership, but when you really peel it back, you're like, you absolutely are leading an entire team, if not more, like, through a process. You're partnering with them. It's a developmental process, both mentally, emotionally, and physically, because you've got to earn that trust for them to essentially hand over the keys to the car and say, okay, like, give me a tune-up. Like, I trust you. And that trust piece is so hard to build, and it's super easy to destroy if you take one wrong turn or say the wrong thing. It's like, okay, well, that's just shot myself in the foot now. So I just noticed that from afar with you, just with players. You were able to relate to them because you were just, you shot them straight. You told them the truth.
I think one of the, and maybe this is something that's always drawn me towards the rehab side of things, you're really getting people at their most vulnerable. Like, we all have our ups and downs when things are starting to happen, especially when injuries occur. But you really are, like, you're craving somebody you can trust, I think, subconsciously. And then usually you want to be told, like, hey, here's the roadmap. If we do these things, you're going to get better.
You want that certainty.
Yeah, you can't always guarantee that by any means, but that's when you're vulnerable, you want something. You just want things taken care of, and that's something I think just on the professional, like, if I'm wearing my professional hat, like, you need to take that job or like that responsibility seriously, because they're essentially entrusting you with the keys to their kingdom, their career. And so you do start to see more and more like, well, yeah, like if they think you're just going to do what the organization wants, they're not going to trust that. They're not going to just hand that over blindly. Or maybe they've been burned in the past too. Like we don't know everybody's story.
Right.
There's a lot of journeymen in every pro sport that, you know, they clearly, when you become a journeyman, you've probably been burned somewhere along the line.
Sure. Yeah, it's like the guys in the world I used to be in, you'd see them every now, you'd run across guys like this every now and then where they were just hell-bent on winning the exchange, right? I'm going to win this negotiation. I'm like, okay, I get it, you know, and you got a better deal on this contract or whatever it might be, but like, what are the long-term ramifications of that? Like, at what cost did you get that 10% discount on the 3-year deal, right? Like, are you going to be able to ever work with that agent again? Is that player going to hate you? Like, you know, what are the ripple effects of that? And so I'm curious, have you seen, talk about sort of the humility and people being vulnerable when they get injured, which I think we can all relate to. Have you seen guys that you knew them pre-injury and they were one way and they worked through an injury? And I'm not talking physically, I'm talking more sort of mentally and emotionally that they're kind of different guys on the other side of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's so many, especially at the top end of sports, like because you see the whole continuum of what an athlete goes through, depending on where they're at. Because you had in the low minor leagues, I mean, you would have guys that clearly had identified that the game was too fast for them, but and like great kids, you know, I think they meant well, but it's like when they identified that, they generally knew like, okay, this is my last chance. Just hold on. It's like hanging on for dear life. And then they can always say, hey, I didn't make it because I blew out or something, you know?
Yeah.
But it's not everybody would do that, but it is like a built-in crutch for them, for some of those kids at that age and that level. And again, I get it. Like that's all they've ever done. They've been the best everywhere they've gone. And then they get to pro ball. It's like, oh, this is different.
Yeah.
But yeah, you see that later on too. And if some people you don't tell them what they want to hear, hey, they might be different around you after that. Because they're going to talk, if they're that type of individual, they're going to talk to somebody that's going to tell them what they want to hear.
There's always somebody who want to tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah. And you see that you see that a lot of people in the private space do that. You see it in the team space too. That's when you don't have a true team pulling in the same direction, then you get like there's people working angles.
Yeah.
And that can detract from a lot. And that's probably the part about pro sports that I did not miss more than anything. Like that was a constant challenge. And some organizations, it happens everywhere, but some organizations more than others. That's fine. That's life too.
Yeah, it would always drive me crazy. You would encounter agents who, you know, some agents genuinely, they're good at what they do. They, you know, aid in the process of getting a deal done for their player or helping their player, and they're advocating for their player, and the team's advocating for their interests, and you reach a mutual agreement. And then there are others that you encounter that are not so. Do not keep the player's best interest in mind. And I would hear some like horror stories, whether it's at the amateur level or in the big leagues. And you're like, man, like didn't relay that an offer had been, you know, extended, you know, and you're like, man, you're playing with people's lives at this point. And that would drive me crazy. And I see it now, you know, as I'm further removed from it, like at the youth level, at the amateur level, you know, there's so many predatory people out there that are just looking to make a buck or looking to make a name for themselves. And to the point earlier about you're always going to find somebody to tell you what you want to hear, you know, and find somebody that's going to tell you the truth, whether you like it or not, you know, as an athlete or elsewhere. And that's where it's like, it's probably the father in me coming out. It's like, man, I wish I was an okay college player. I would have loved a scout to pull me aside and be like, here's what you do okay, here's where you stink, and here are your chances of playing pro ball. That's all I wanted to do, And I never had that conversation, never had that opportunity, and maybe it wouldn't have made a bit of difference. But I would have loved to at least. I was just so naive and stupid. It was just like, see ball, hit ball, go, do things. And I take that, I kind of play that out forward. Just find somebody who's gonna like shoot you straight and let you know, like, hey, you're not very good, okay, and like you're never gonna be successful in this area. Yeah, but you laugh, but I mean, I know you've done it. You've been like, I've heard you say it to players, right? Hey, dude, you're not very good there, right? You can't do it. You're not fast. Don't pretend like you're fast. You're not fast, right? Like, and some of it's just a macho bravado. Guys like to just, talk smack in the locker room, but like, hey, dude, like, all serious aside, you do not have the green light. Don't try to steal second base, right?
Like, oh no, honestly, and I think this is society as a whole too. Like, it's narcissism just being played out. It's like narcissism feeding more narcissism, and I think I looked a lot like I got super frustrated at one point in my career. Just like, man, like I feel like there's one guy that first sparked my interest. I was like, he's clearly like in it for himself. Yet, like, he could tell enough jokes where it's like, he can kind of like goof around with people, and it's like, wow, people just put blinders up when that happens. Like,
this is a player or a staff mate?
This is a staff member.
Okay.
I was like, this is incredible, and like, been around for a long time, and it's just like, wow, and that first like sparked my interest in like just into narcissism in general. So Ryan Maid and I had a lot of talks about this actually, but then it's like, oh man, that's a whole Pandora's box, like wrapped up in it. You just start seeing it, and I think we all have narcissistic traits to an extent. So I don't want anybody to read into that incorrectly, but you start seeing it like really start to play out. Wow, like I'm identifying this, but I mean maybe I have some of these traits myself, but like I'm seeing this happen, and I'm seeing people that are really good at it. You see it in politics, like once you start like seeing
it's a pattern. Yeah, you start picking it up.
Yeah. I mean, politics are the easiest place. George Costanza is like, I love Seinfeld, so I talk about Seinfeld a lot, but I think he said it the best. Like, it's not a lie if you believe it. That's narcissism 101.
Yeah.
And like people that some of the stuff they say, you're like, this is crazy. But again, like they start to believe it at a certain point. It's like, all right, that's just, I don't get it, but you almost have to reconcile with like, okay, I'm not going to get that, but like I can identify it, and then you just have to figure out.
Well, and that can serve athletes really well, that level of like, I don't know, maybe not narcissism, but like confidence, arrogance, lack of self-awareness to some extent, right? Because they no fear of failure. I can't fail. I'm bulletproof until they do. But, that was like, we talked about this a lot in the minor leagues players. Like, you want to straddle that line of empowering and letting them fail, teaching them how to fail almost, like, in a developmental track. And so they can do it on the biggest stage and not just wilt from the pressure like anybody potentially could. But you also got to, like, check in with them and be like, hey, guys, just remember, you can't do everything all the time, right? And that's, we've had a lot of conversations about hiring for the same reason, right? Like you look around and you start looking at a staff. It's easier to do it sometimes on the outside, outside looking in, or maybe you have like a toe in the water where you know enough about the organization, and you're just like, it's like an echo factory. You're just hiring, or an echo chamber. You're hiring everybody that says the same thing and thinks the same way, And I know you and I and others were different, where we kind of actively sought out different opinions and tried to make up for our own deficiencies and insecurities by finding people that are better in those areas. And we're far from having it all figured out. But like, I don't know. I just feel like that resonates with people. It resonates with players. They can sniff it out in a heartbeat. Like if you're being disingenuous, if you're trying to lead in a way that's not authentic, or you're trying to communicate in a way that just doesn't resonate, they're like, man, no thanks. Move on to the next guy.
People start regurgitating, the latest book that's out, more or less. Or, you know what was super helpful for me? I did. I was talking to a psych friend that had worked for. He was in the special operations community. He was in and worked with Red Bull for a while. And he said actually in both situations they have brought in improv, like even in the special operations community.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's such a good idea. So like I took like I don't know, 8-12 week improv course in the off season, and that was the nice thing about living in LA. And that was like the things like I was learning in there. I'm never gonna be an improv all-star. That wasn't the intent. Like you just start picking up on things people are doing. Like we're all doing improv all day, every day.
Right,
and like I remember sitting in a meeting and I watched like the head guy wasn't there and like one of his assistants was there, and it was like, oh my gosh, like this is playing out. Like he put his feet up on the desk like the head guy would all the time, and like the head guy was like, that's just who he was. Like he wasn't trying, he wasn't pretending to be that person, and you were just seeing that person like. And this is one thing we talked about in the improv world is like, hey, like people have to give you like the respect of that position. Like you don't just take it, like no matter what it is. And like that person just thought like because that they were kind of the next person in charge and they automatically got that. And you saw it playing out. It was unbelievable. I wish this is actually I've probably only talked about it maybe one other time, probably to Ryan. But it's, oh my gosh. Yeah, so anybody that's listening to this should go take an improv course because it'll totally, it'll upend your thoughts on just your daily interactions.
Yeah, I'll buy it. I'll buy that for sure. I mean, there's just like the sociological study side of it, and then there's also just like the, get comfortable being uncomfortable kind of deal. I mean, there's nothing more uncomfortable than just standing up on stage and you don't know what you're up there to do yet. That's like a lot of people's nightmare.
Yeah, that's... The nice, it wasn't a huge class, so that was probably helpful. I'm sure if we had to do a big thing at the end, that may have deterred me a little bit. But
we should have done this at the Braves. Yeah. We should have. I wish you had done this years ago. This would have been a great idea.
I know.
Someone's gonna steal this idea. We're gonna read about this in a magazine in a couple of years. That some
I know. I've got a friend actually that's doing it. Part of his course track that he does. It's, I'm telling you, like it could be in any professional world.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer. As much as people would want to laugh about it, like I would recommend anybody did it. I mean,
no, I'll buy
it. Yeah, it's pretty entertaining, especially when you start seeing it play out.
Yeah, well, it's just people mimicking what they think they're supposed to do. I've never been a leader, but I've seen these guys. It's the same thing reading a book and you're parroting back what you heard or saw this in a movie or a TED Talk.
In the Matrix, right?
That's right. That's right. So now that you're out of the Matrix, right? You're out of the Matrix of working for a team, but you're still doing what you love. I love to hear that you're kind of refound your passion or rediscovered your passion of working with athletes, like primarily professional athletes, I imagine. But what would you tell? What's one thing you would tell young athletes to do or not to do? Just generally speaking.
Yeah. I think number one, they need to find a mentor. So as a pro athlete, the veteran guys are usually good about that. It doesn't have to be your position group. If you're a football player or baseball, if you can find somebody, the guys that have been around for a while stick to their hip, number one, because they're generally training different. They're just doing things differently than most of the younger guys.
Yeah, they didn't get that longevity on accident, right?
Yeah, and it usually takes an injury or injuries starting to occur on the training side of things for the younger athletes to start taking some of those things. I don't want to say seriously because I think that's gotten pushed so much the past decade. But you're not going to train the same when you're 28, 32, 35 as you did when you were 18 or 21 years old.
Right.
And figuring that part out, I can't tell you how many athletes I've listened to talk about that have long careers.
The evolution of their training?
Yeah, and just how they take care of themselves in general. There's a lot more
self-care. Yeah.
I think involved. That word's been on my mind a lot lately. Just the discipline it takes, and I think that's everybody in life. Like, it's easy to stay up and watch Netflix, until 2 a.m. You got to get up at 6. It's not the best decision, but like we all have disciplines in our lives that we probably ebb and flow, and people. I'm fascinated by like super type A people, especially people that are like, they're not professional athletes, but they're like triathletes.
Yeah.
Like they are like, you want to talk about discipline. I mean, this is an extreme example. I remember talking to a guy at NASA that was like super important job in NASA, had like 3 kids, he was running like full Ironman. But he would wake up at like 4 a.m. He'd get his run in. Over his lunch break, he'd get his swim in. Like, he was, again, this was extreme, but like, to be if you truly want to be a high performer, and that's like, as an athlete, as a parent, anything, like there's a level of discipline that has to take place. And I think that's when they start figuring that piece out and start looking at like, all right, like just because everybody else is doing that, and it's following the herd. Don't follow the herd. You've got to find your way as well. But like, guys, the game has changed in every sport so much because I think drug testing has changed so much. Like, you can't go like run it hard at night like you did in college or like early in your career. Like, guys can't continue to do that and have a sustainable career.
I meant, from your experience, what percentage or whatever, how many guys figure that out before? I don't say it's too late, but before they crash into the brick wall, have an injury or performance dips or whatever, and how many have to actually face that adversity before they're like, okay, I can't run it like I used to.
I wish I could put a better number on it, but it's usually. It usually is an injury or some sort of performance, like their performance starts to drop off. You see it so many times. There's very few guys in any sport that just like, they start great and then they just like continue to go up and up, something usually cracks. And
I get it too. It's like, hey, I got here doing it this way. I'm not going to change. Like, I'm not going to change until I prove that, or it's proven to me, I guess, that it doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to argue.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, all right, I'll be here.
You're like, I will be exactly. I will be here when you find out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to paint too much of a negative connotation on it, but now it's like you see things, you just see trends over and over, and that's all the statistics world is even looking at. Like, it's just looking for trends. It's not telling you. There's no magic that's saying like, hey, you're for sure going to get this injury. That's a big thing in the medical and performance world, like injury prediction. People,
you and I have been a part of conversations like this where that I would just chuckle because I'm like, what else can you do? But like, you're in trade discussions or whatever, and it gets to the point where it's they're reviewing the medicals and this and that. Andrew, is this guy gonna get hurt? No, is he going to break? Tell me if he's going to break. Okay, good luck. Good luck. Right.
Trades are a whole other. We could go down a long discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, we could. I always felt like some general managers were just baiting like the other GMs just to see how far they could push them, and then they didn't want to make the trade anyways.
Right. So this guy's got 6 fingers, and I just can't. I can't go there. Yeah.
And to finish off your question about athletes, the best athletes, like no matter what their norm is, it always kind of levels out. They're never too high, they're never too low, and like they're always like right here. And whether that's here, or here, that's not the point. But like the people I've seen that have had like long, successful careers in any sport have all been that.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah, I mean, I always liked Tim Duncan, right? Like, the big fundamental, and he was boring, and nobody liked watching him play. Like, all this guy does is do everything right and win championships, and like, it's not good enough for a lot of people, And
but
so,
Bill Belichick had that same comment talking. I remember this was recent. Somebody talking about, and it had to be the last couple of years, how like there were too many rules or whatever, and it was boring in New England. He's like, oh, winning championships is boring. Like,
right,
but you do even the sustainable teams. They're all here. They're never too high. They're never too low. They're always able to kind of recalibrate. And I think that's like great athletes, great teams. They have the same. I mean, they parallel each other perfectly. Great business companies. They do the same thing.
And I think the thing they all share, honestly, is they understand the purpose behind the routine, right? So many great athletes and, I mean, great executives, great coaches, what have you, they're so beholden to their routines because it works for them. But it's like they're not going to freak out if their flight gets delayed and they don't get in until 4 a.m. and they can't do that routine, whatever that thing might be, the exact same way they've done it for the last 47 days, right? They understand like the intent behind this is why I put my left shoe on before my right, because blah blah blah, and so they're able to like compensate and okay, I missed today, all right, I'll get back at it tomorrow, right? Like and that's that sort of awareness of like the greater idea, which leads from great athletes to great teams. Like the great teams understand, hey, this is the culture that we've established. These are the values that we hold. Yeah, there's little like non sequiturs that are going to happen here or there, but we'll allow that, but then we're going to bring it back in, right? And those are the great. I mean, you bring up New England. New England did that very well for years. The Spurs did that for years. There's plenty of examples of teams that just boring good. And I love, the Belichick quote about. I mean, I remember when Gronk left, even when Brady left, like it was sort of understood they left because they were just kind of tired of the act and it just became a grind. I'm like, man, it became now they both went off and won a championship in Tampa, so like, okay, great. But yeah, it is a grind, but the goal was to win championships, and they did a pretty good job at that for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's funny because everybody like will quote like John Wooden and all that. Like, I mean, what did John Wooden spend like 3 hours going over how to put on your socks correctly? So you want to talk about just like mundane, what people would think is mundane details. Details matter. I remember when I first got to an organization, somebody told me like, man, you care like a lot, like too much about details. It's like, that's why this isn't going to work.
Yeah, right. Let me stop you right there. Yeah.
It is.
No, I totally agree. I mean, we've had this conversation before about like the Braves, right? So we joined an organization that we had deliberately embarked on a rebuild, and it was a very proud organization, very historic organization, a lot of great players, and a lot of great history, and this and that. And I think you and I were wired similarly. We were always I think we tweaked some people in the process of like asking the why, right? Like, okay, I get it. You guys have always done it this way. Explain to me why you've always done it this way, right? And the analogy I always go to is, they don't wear you're not allowed to wear your sunglasses on your hat.
Yeah.
Okay, I get that's the rule. Why? And it goes back to Bobby Cox, and maybe it even predates him. But as far as I know, it was Bobby. They said you don't want to cover up the logo. The A is something to be proud of. It's part of our uniform. We're not going to cover that up with Oakley's. Okay, right. Like it or not, I buy it. It's got a reason. I'm so good enough. Yeah. But like so many people have rules just for the sake of rules or routines for the sake of routines, and that like I just have no patience for that. And it's a flaw of mine because I'm like that. I have very little tolerance or patience for it, and I think I also am a terrible poker player, so people know right away that I have no like tolerance or patience for it. If you can't explain the why, like, what do we do?
That's honestly like I always try, and I've got a friend with the NBA organization that does this really well, but like I'd always try to bring in people from different places, different sports, just different avenues. They come, like you have coffee with them, or they come like tour your facility. That's when you get those questions, because then it keeps you sharp. Because like,
yes.
I thought I had a why, but I really don't.
It turns out I don't know why we do that. Yeah.
But it does. It keeps you sharp because, and I think every industry just professional industry, not just sports, is probably like this. You have so many things that have been done for so long where that just become routine. If you're in that field, you become biased, even when you don't think you're biased. You're just around it
for sure.
all the time. So it's like you can't really control that even. So I think we do, like, it serves us best to have people from the outside, because it's like those childlike questions. Like,
I was just gonna say, it's the beauty of like having kids, man. They will humble you, like they'll just cut you down at your knees in a heartbeat and be like, well, I don't know why I do that now that I think of it, but I do it though. Right?
But I do. I think we need that in every walk of professionalism and just life in general. To your point, that's what our kids are doing. So we should probably take notice.
Yeah, and it gets back to a lot of us, I think, with self-awareness of being okay admitting you don't know everything, and being okay saying I'm not very good in this area. And that's where I think the really good organizations separate themselves, is you establish a safe space where people can say that and actually be vulnerable and know that, the person to the left and right of you are going to help you and pick you up, whether it's picking up the slack for you or helping develop that blind spot for you, rather than viewing it as an opportunity to be like, aha, I'm stabbing this guy in the back and I'm going to take his job, right? Like and there's plenty of that out there, but maybe good organizations are, focus on that development side.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. But there's a lot of that being said. I don't think there's a lot of that being carried out. And this is where I probably have a little bit different thought than most. Like, people say, like, oh, you don't have to be friends with the people you work with. I disagree with that. And, like, I'm not saying you have to go out and get beers with them every night by any means, but who do you trust more than, like, your friend? Like, we're not family. Like, we're being paid by somebody to be here. We should put that aside. Like, oh, this organization is a family. No, let's put that aside. It's different. But, like, you should be, like, you can only, in my opinion, you can really, as a whole, some people can do it. More people, in my opinion, can't do it. But you can really only have those super honest and upfront conversations with people you trust. And that comes through a friendship. So, again, I don't think people would generally agree with that statement. I mean, I've heard people say, oh, we don't have to be friends, we just have to work together. Like, yeah, but, like, just knowing that, like, I don't feel like I can, like, if I tell you this, like, you're going to run with it somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's just, that doesn't work long term. I'm not saying you can't win. You throw money at things like that tends in the sporting world, or I'd say, I mean, I'm sure even in the professional world as well.
Yeah.
That can cover up a lot of things.
Sure.
And you can still have some success, but I'm thinking about, like, long-term sustainable success where people are continuing to grow. You look forward to being in that environment every day. And, like, we talked about hiring people to take your job. At least if they're not taking your job directly, like, they're able to move on and go do that job, whatever their goal is or passion is, somewhere else. That was always my goal, like, in roles personally, like in Atlanta. Like, hey, like, cool, you want to go to an NBA team and do this? Like, I want to help you get there, and, like, we'll give you honest, transparent feedback to do that. But it's not. At that point, it just becomes about something bigger. That's not an environment for everybody, I don't think, either. Some people do just want to be told what to do and keep their mouth shut and go to work every day.
It's easier.
Like that. Yeah.
Look, I've thought a lot about this too. It's easier to both give and receive orders, than it is to do it the other way. To get buy-in, to collaborate across a spectrum and get buy-in to get everybody going in one direction, or to have to take accountability and ownership of your own career, of your own actions. Like, that's way harder. It's easy to show up and have your commanding officer just give you orders. I mean, I'm not saying, like, physically or mentally it's easier, but, like, I know there's a clear chain of command. I know what my objective is. I'm going to go do that. I don't have to think about anything else, and there's a lot of people that can be really effective and really successful doing it that way. But to your point earlier, I think it's getting back to that foundation of trust, which we talked about with players, just basically not having it more often than not with the organization that they're with, because it is a business and everybody understands the business. So like, don't act like it's not a business. And like, I would always love like these guys that, that were in roles like myself that would come down to the clubhouse and all of a sudden it's like a different dude walking around. And it's like, now it's like, Johnny, a high school football star, and you're like broing out with everyone. And I'm like, what is this act? And it's like, you don't think these guys see through this and don't know what you're doing, And so it's just like, you can't, to your point about trust, like if you don't, that's sort of the prerequisite for me as well. Like this is most people, like if I don't trust you, like you have no chance of ever breaking the inner circle, right? You're on the outside. Maybe we could be acquaintances or social, friends, whatever, but like, you're never going to get all of me. You're never going to get that full transparency.
And it's funny too, because I mean, I've been in organizations that kind of have like, they have the club, like the in club, and those are the same places that talk like, oh, this is a safe space, you can say what you want, but like, no, you have this little club, like you guys they're really friends at that point. And they're speaking freely, but then outside of that, they want you to do that to them, and it's like, I've seen this. You're not fooling me.
Yeah, right. Getting back to athletes, like what do you had a conversation with somebody the other day about this, and I wanted to hear your perspective on it. Like what separates the good ones from the great ones, or even like what separates the really good amateur or even AAA player from the major league player, the guys that can do it, the people that can do it at the highest level. What is the separator in your opinion?
So I would, and we've touched on some of these things. I'd kind of look at like three things. One, there's like such a high level of consistency, and that's in everything they do. It's not just their performance on the field, but like their routines or like how they just take care of themselves. Like they're very consistent, and there's such a that's like the slow burn,
Yeah.
Like that's the chronic. You know what? I think a sport like distance running is just the best example of that. Like they know it's going to take 6 months, 2-3 years, whatever it is, to build the base they want, and like they know they can't rush that process. And I feel like the really consistent athletes at the highest level are that way. The emotional regulation too is the second part of that. I think, again, like you see great play. You might see more talent in like low A ball than you do in the major leagues in some instances, but they're not consistent and they're emotionally all over the place. Like, yeah, they're
and those two things are usually linked.
But like you see that, like I saw that over and over. It's like, wow, this kid is like nasty. Like 97 from the left side, ton of run. Like, I mean, he could be in the big talent-wise. He could easily be in the big leagues right now. But then but that's not what it's all about. That's all potential, and that's what you're generally getting drafted off of. Those two things are big, and the great ones. This is something that I remember having a conversation with Neil Ramp when I was in the minor leagues, and I definitely stole this from him. But he would always tell me, he's like, man, I try to like any high performer, like that could be like an owner even, like he was always looking for one thing about them that stood out. And you definitely, like when you start looking for it, there's something in every high performer that there's just a little different. It's not the same by any means for everybody, but like I know there's this one guy I work with. I've never seen an ability to like when he locks in, like again, I'm going to take this back to Seinfeld, but I remember Kramer. I saw Joe DiMaggio at Dinky Donuts, and he's like, he was making all these noises, and he said he didn't even look away from his coffee. He was so locked in on dunking his donut in his coffee. But it always makes me think of that, because it's like, wow, this guy, he could just shut like everything off around him when he's ready to lock in.
Yeah.
But again, like I think every high performer, they have something about them that is different, and it's not. I mean, unless you're, a borderline Olympic sprinter, it's not usually a physical attribute.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The intense focus obviously is probably a common one. Like the short memory is another one, right? Like just the ability to flush a bad at bat or a bad pitch, and it's gone. It's like it never happened.
I remember Neil telling me about it. Like I don't remember what team it was even now, but it was an owner, and he was like, he remembers everybody's name, like, and he will always like when he sees them, he'll always say, "Hey, so and so, hey Billy."
Yeah.
That's they're listening to you.
Yes.
Again, that's almost like, oh wow, he listened to me. I felt heard. It goes back to that.
No, I think that's a huge superpower, man. I think like the like really good listening, or someone who's just a good listener. It's like it sounds kind of like hokey. First of all, you learn a lot more listening than you do talking, and then when you listen and you can engage someone on a personal level, like that person feels it. And if you're the owner of a team or whoever, like that exchange, that emotional bond or whatever that you have with that individual is going to be way more impactful and meaningful because they're like, this person's listening to me. I totally get that. But I love that. I mean, there's always something that separates those guys, or those I shouldn't say guys, those people, because it's and the idea that it's not uniform. It's something different, based on position, upbringing, background, personality, what have you. But they can all like lean on it. And a lot of times I feel like they don't even know they have it. It's like this superpower, and it's just so innate in them. And they've done it their whole life. And now they're just doing it at such an elite level that they don't even, it's like, it's subconscious.
I think it is that it factor. People talk about the it factor. Again, I think it's different for everybody. It is. It's talk about them being a Marvel superhero. But like I think everybody in that realm, that you're just like, wow, like that, they're phenomenal, whatever they do. I remember going I'm trying to think, this was a while ago now, but I love going to different sports. I don't really like watching sports on TV anymore, but I like going to different sporting events. If I know like just a high-end athlete's going to be there. And I remember going and seeing, I saw Sidney Crosby play, and this was, I think he won the MVP that year. And I was like, okay, wow, like, he doesn't look, nothing about him like physically is jumping out, but he just like, you could see it. It looks like he's playing a different game than everybody else.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing another player, he's on the Maple Leafs now. It's like, wow, like physically this guy's just like better than everybody. He doesn't necessarily look like he's playing a different game, but he's doing it he's playing this game at a faster level. And then Ronaldo, this was when Ronaldo was Real Madrid. And I saw they had another player on their team. I was like, wow, that guy's like, he looks like he's faster than everybody. But then it's like Ronaldo looked like he was playing a different game, and he just looked like he was working smarter than everybody else. And then you start picking up on his physical attributes. So it's like it's not a surprise when you see some of these people do what they do at such a high level. I can only imagine like what you'd see like with Messi or something at this point. Even now in his career, a lot of people should be really excited about. This is like LeBron going and playing in Europe, or Jordan.
Yeah.
Like he's still like LeBron's not. Maybe he's not the player he was 3-4 years ago. He's still easily a top 10 player in the league.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting that from Messi now. Like he's still probably top 5 player in the world at this age. And I think as you get older in a sport, the saying of like working smarter, not harder, you just get more and more efficient at everything you're doing at a high level.
Exactly.
Like, that's an opportunity. I get why people would pay so much money to go see it. Like it's going to be an opportunity to see like high performing at its peak, really. Still,
it's like going to seeing a concert pianist or somebody that's just like otherworldly at what they do, or an opera singer or whatever. It's going to be a performance. It's going to be a show, and that's the part. That stuff I love. I had Bob McKillop on, who's a former men's basketball coach at Davidson, talking about Steph Curry, and like Curry's the perfect example for me of the guy that he looked like he was 11 years old when he was in college, right? But had incredible body control and like just court vision and all these like, it wasn't like jump out of the gym physical skills, but he had all these things he could do. He just at 19, 20 years old, however old he was, he could just do it all. He just didn't have the body to kind of go along with it. And so you're like, this is never going to play at the next level. Like he'll play, he'll be finding his spot up shoot. He'll have a 10-year career and he'll be great. But then it all sort of comes together. And it's again, like I always appreciate those athletes, your point about Messi, like all of these, like just shaving a little bit off, like the nuance of the skill and the subtle off ball stuff. And I love doing that too. I love going to a sport that I don't know anything about and just seeing if I can, it's like the old scout in me, like sit back and just find the best one, right? Like you know who the most athletic is, like that part's easy. But like the ones that are like it's a little bit easier, the way they move, the way they interact, you're like, that's the best player. I don't they may not be playing at the next level, but that's the best player on this team.
Yeah. That's I think why talent identification and like especially in like the European soccer world is such that is scouting. They say it fancier British term. Talent identification.
Talent identification. Okay.
But and that's, I think, where Messi becomes interesting because he was never – this is the complete opposite, I think, of what happens in U.S. sports. Like, you're always looking for the most physically dominant player on the field because, they're throwing harder, doing this. Like, he was always way smaller than everybody else. So, for him, like, he was forced to – that was a constraint. Like, he was forced to find a way to be better than everybody else if he wants to succeed. And again, like you start appreciating some of those things. I think it's like once you start seeing them, you're like, oh, okay, that's different, and that is different in every performing realm. But again, when you know it, it's like something's different there. I haven't figured out what, but like there's something. I mean, you see it in kids coming out of the draft all the time.
Yeah, I think you see it outside of sports too, right? You see it in entertainment, and there's a reason that all the leading men are like 5'7". You know what I mean? Like they were small and they had to develop this charisma and whatever. Like so, this challenge at one point kind of becomes a superpower, and you wind up, if you get good enough at that, it becomes a huge strength and an asset for you. But it's fun. I mean, like again, in like the talent identification. Like a lot of guys in the draft room will outsmart themselves because you're like, it only ticks 9 out of 10 boxes, and that last box is super important to us. And you're like, I get it, but he's striking out 15 per 9, and he's like this, like let's not take away what he's doing. He just did it. We saw him do it. I know it doesn't look the way you want it to, but he's doing it. And so that's where like the heart and the mind are in like conflict and struggle. It's like, okay, like do I believe what I'm seeing, and can I project that, like sort of take my statistical hat off and project that forward in my mind's eye of like, yes, I can see that working because I've seen him do that against really good players? Or is it going to be like, well, no, that doesn't scale. That doesn't extrapolate out at the major league level, so I'm just not going to go there. I mean, look at like a guy like Chris Sale, right? Like mechanics are never going to work. That guy's going to break. Max Scherzer, the guy's going to break. Maybe not.
Yeah. Maybe he wins multiple Cy Youngs.
Yeah.
If they met Max Scherzer, they would know he's got something different about him.
For sure.
He's got the it factor for sure.
Yeah.
No, I think the NBA and the NFL probably have the best opportunities to see that year in and year out because of how their draft process is. Because you're going to see like within that year or the next year, that person. It's pretty much like you're showing who you are within those first 2 years at that point. I mean, Michael Jordan did not go first overall. So, again, people get nervous. And, again, they latch on to something. And this is where I think, like, people are – we've both seen this a lot. Like, people are emotional beings. And instead of going back to, like, hey, this is, to your point, this guy's striking out 15 per 9. Maybe in this case I should just take my emotion out of it and go with this guy. People in I think any setting really struggle with that because when things get stressful and they have to make a decision, they're probably going to go with their emotional bias more often than not.
Well, there's comfort and certainty too. To your earlier point about, when a guy's hurt and he's looking for the answers, right? If I make this decision and I have all the numbers to back it up, then if it fails, hey, that's the way it goes, right? I had a good process, it just didn't work out. But if I go with my gut and I go against the grain and it fails, then I've got egg on my face and everybody makes fun of me. It's like, yeah, but if you don't, it's like, so there's comfort in that certainty and those numbers, and that's where sports has obviously exploded with the analytics piece of that, and that's where I think we've probably over-rotated a little bit, and we've mitigated the human element of that. Let's not lose the forest to the trees here and see that these are human beings competing and living lives outside of whatever they're doing on the field or the court or whatever. But there's comfort in that. People are like, hey, you know what? The numbers told me to do it. And don't blame me, blame the numbers, right? I didn't make a decision. The numbers did.
Well, no, that is. There's a lot of truth in that, and you see that a lot too. Like you can latch onto something, and it's like, well, I won't lose my job because this is what this is what the numbers say. Okay, but at some point too, I think this goes back to like now going into the private space or leaving the pro sports world. Part of that is betting on yourself too. Like, hey, maybe I'm going to swing and miss on this, but let's see how it goes.
Well, that's the great thing, right? Being in the private spaces now, you don't have to, answer to anyone other than, sort of yourself and the athletes you're working with. But having that good boss, having that good leader on the team side is like asking those questions, like, hey, take a risk, fail, pick your spots. Don't do it every single time. But asking that question, okay, but why? Right? Well, this guy's down today. Okay, but why? Right? And again, it gets back to your kids asking why you do something. If you don't have an answer, you look bad. They don't look bad. They're just kids. Yeah. They're just asking an innocent question, right? That's what I always love is when people get angry, with an innocent question, because they don't have the answer, right?
That's honestly this whole the NBA is perfect for the load monitoring stuff. It's just been such a hot button issue in the NBA, and it's been a little bit in baseball. I've seen that blow up in some people's faces, and football. You see it in every sport now. But it's rare that they have much of a process, and what I've seen, much of a process behind it other than oh, that's what I wrote down. That just makes sense. Okay, I'd just like to know how you're defining that. Why is he not ready to play? And that's what a manager wants to know. I've been asked that question. I remember a guy coming back, wanted to rush a guy back from an injury. He's not ready to play back-to-back days. I remember the manager. I'm in his office. We're in Kansas City, ironically enough, and he said, "Are you trying to get me fired?" and he's like, "I'm serious." In my mind, I'm like, "Wow, if we're worried about this guy getting back, as all our hopes in the field were in more trouble than I thought." But I didn't have anything to back that up, and I feel like that sent me down some other paths, just of how I do things. But it's a fair question. That's what the decision makers want to know. They should want a why.
Exactly.
So, like I said, it's sent me down some other paths. But then it's okay, this also might go the other way on us. In that hamstring or that guy coming back from that injury instance, he might not be back longer. We may be without him longer now. So it can go both ways. You just have to be prepared for those instances.
It's just making an informed decision. That's all people want to be able to do. And the reality of it is sometimes you can't. Yeah. It's especially in the world you're in, you're hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what the numbers tell us. Do what you want to do. You're the boss. Make the decision. That's the best I got for you.
Those are always comforting situations. Millions of people watching on TV. Guy comes back for a first game and let's say it's a hamstring. It's always gonna roll out hit it.
100%. 13 chopper.
It's gonna be harder than he ever ran while he was rehabbing.
Yeah. Maybe rained a little bit. Coming out of rain delay, it'll be a little bit wet out.
Oh yeah. And you're just holding your breath, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You honestly those first games back, you're I want to either hit a home run or I want to just like barrel something up right at somebody. Like this
Yeah.
just needs to be over quick.
Right. Or strike out looking. Never take the bat off your shoulder.
Yeah. Surprise. Not always 100% confidence.
Right. Read any good books lately? Got any book recommendations?
Oh, yes.
You're usually good for one of those.
Let's see. So I'm kind of all over the map with what I'm reading. I'm usually reading multiple things at once.
See, I can't do that.
Yeah,
I don't have the. I got like tunnel vision.
Yeah. Hey, I wish I did a better job of that, but like I'm like our dog. You see a squirrel and I'm off.
All right, what squirrels are you chasing right now, man?
Let's see. I'm reading. This is gonna get super sciencey. I'm reading a thermoregulation book in human performance. Ooh, I am reading a like brain and our senses. That's another book I'm looking at. I've got a stack of books.
So this is like beach reading, just kick back with a fruity drink.
Normal light reading. Looking a lot into being done in the pool. Synchronized swim. No, not just performance things in the pool. My wife always gives me a hard time. Like, well, why aren't you like read a novel or something?
Dude, it's so funny. I like cataloged what I read last year at the end of the year just because I was curious, and I went back and like, let's see what I read. And there wasn't a novel in the group. It was all like nonfiction, whatever. And I'm like, this is the year I read a novel. I'm gonna force myself to do it.
I have tried that many times, and you know what? I do like biographies.
Yeah.
Again, that's not what we're talking about, but that's the closest thing. I haven't read this recently, but this is one of my favorite books ever. It's just called George Marshall. It's like his biography. George Marshall was the chief of staff during World War II. Not very many people know about him, but he's the one that handpicked like Eisenhower, Patton, and like he totally gutted how the military like hierarchy was at that time. To me he was a lot like Bill Belichick, and I say that because like if you look at some of Belichick's coaches, like they've gone on and kind of struggled on their own, but like within his system, like they're perfect.
They flourish. Yeah.
Yeah, they're in perfect positions to be great. Saban does that at Alabama too. And like you just kind of saw the overarching principles of what he was about. And again, like it clearly wasn't about him. Nobody really, maybe they've heard of the Marshall Plan, but nobody really knows about him. And he could have he picked Eisenhower to be in that role rather than himself, because he identified.
Yeah, I was gonna say he could have leveraged that politically, I'm sure.
Yeah. So that's just one that I always try to think about, like, I read a lot. I got a lot of books, and thinking about like, all right, what are like the books I would tell people to read? That's a for sure.
That sounds good.
In any aspect. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck reading about. There's another one about mitochondria right now. So
yeah, nobody wants to do that, Andrew. No, the Marshall book sounds good though. I'll check that out. And I thought about that. We've had conversations like about this in other contexts, but yeah, I'm a New England kid, so I grew up a big Patriots fan and have objectively admired what they accomplished, independent of my fanboyness. But yeah, it's always been like, you have this great coach, the Bill Walsh coaching tree and all this other stuff in Belichick, and all these, so many opportunities to assistant coaches, and rightfully so, and not a ton of success. And Saban, to your point, there's been baseball executives that have done that, and those are like two different. I've grown to appreciate those are two different skills of developing people. It's probably a two-step process. Identifying people that ultimately have the capacity to run the show on their own eventually, and then developing them, not maybe with that specifically in mind, but developing them and giving that opportunity, versus finding talented people who fit within your system, which I think is very much a football thing, right? That's one thing I've always been envious of is like, oh man, these guys get a system. And if they get the system right, all they got to do is go find like these hidden gems that fit their system, right? So that's very much a Belichick that he found like he's been incredibly successful finding system players, but he's found a lot of system coaches too that just fit his needs. And he's gone years without offensive coordinators by title, and nobody's calling the plays, but everybody's calling the plays, and you're like, what the hell's going on?
Those years haven't worked quite as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right about that. Like, okay, no, we do need an offensive coordinator. I've decided this year we need one.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think those are two very different skill sets, and I think they both work. You just have to go like. I don't think you can't just tiptoe in one. You need
you got to go all in. I agree.
Go with that because again, they're going to work. That's what I like. I like looking at coaches with sustainable success, or businessmen too. But I also like usually the first people I'm trying to identify are who are the ones that have had, what's their spider web look like, and how's that been like from a success standpoint.
Yeah.
Because some of like Saban has now had a coach that has gone on and won that. He seems to have had more guys that have gone on and like had more success. It took him a while to beat him, but But with Georgia, he was one of his assistants.
Go Dogs. My wife's a Georgia grad, so we're reaping the benefits in our house. Yeah. No, but you're 100% right. You're 100% right, and it's in the college game. There's so many like separators from the professional game, from how you build your roster and how you build your coaches and all that stuff. But it's very, and I'm curious, like at this point, both those guys probably have the understanding of obviously who they are, what they do well, and whatnot. But like whether you have that awareness as it's happening, 5 years in, or because I don't think you do. I don't think you are seeking out someone who's going to go running over. You're like, I just found this guy. He could be a GM someday. Well, maybe. Because you found a talented person and he can communicate and he's blah, 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 blah. Great. But you don't proactively go seek out someone that's going to go be the GM of your rival someday. But just a development track of how you expose people to things, and again, it's like a lot, both those guys rule with an iron fist with respect to decision making and ultimate authority, as opposed to maybe having a little bit more crowdsourced authority structure, so no one ever gets to really make the decision until they're next on the line, right? And then they're like, well, I don't know what would build here. I don't know.
Yeah, there's zero gray area that they're operating out of in those places. Which again, that's the military is really good at some things, and like that keeps things. Just do your job. I think that's one of Belichick's things. Do your job. Like somebody I'm really interested in right now. Well, Pat Riley for one. Like he's won as a player, a coach, and an executive. Pat Riley's interesting, but I think even more so right now, Eric Spoelstra, the Miami Heat head coach. So he interests me. His first year as an NBA head coach, he had a super team. It was like the big three. That was kind of their unveiling. Managing that situation, I don't think people maybe they do. Maybe I'm ignorant to this. I don't think they recognize how challenging that is because
at the time they thought he was just a puppet. He was just there, and the players were running the show. So they definitely didn't appreciate it. But that is high maintenance leadership right there.
Yeah, you're managing personalities well over anything else because those guys could go out on the court, they'll make the playoffs, but winning a championship is totally different. And just because. You can look at across every sport. The most talented teams rarely are the ones that win every year.
Yeah.
And like seeing that, and why I bring him up is like he went from that to now like what he just took to the NBA Finals. Like, they've got some really good players on that team. Jimmy Butler's a cold-blooded killer in the playoffs. But
no kidding.
But you have a lot of undrafted players in the NBA. And they have a lot of depth, and like they're taking that team to the champ, like within a couple wins from winning a title. Like those are totally different coaching qualities that had to get them there. Like,
Yeah, it's back to the diversity of the ability to do it different ways, right? Like, which I'm sure has been honed over his career from his first year with the big three and to now. But there are some, getting back to the system concept, right, where some guys are so rigid in it that my quarterback has to be 6'4" or taller, and his hands need to be this big, and it needs to throw the ball this far. And it's like you can get so locked into that, and you're like, hold on, like, but what if you can't find that guy? Then what do you do? Like, we still got to play games, and so like being able to like troubleshoot that and roll with the punches a little bit, that is a different skill.
Yeah. I remember having breakfast one time with a relief pitcher we had, and this guy was some of the best natural like stuff I've ever seen. Personality wise, he's all over the place, but like he's super adaptable. And I remember him commenting on a starting pitcher we had that he really struggled, like unbelievable player, was great in the regular season, and he'd just been kind of, I'll say, average in the postseason. And the guy I was having breakfast with kept bringing that up. It's like, man, he's just not like, you throw him off his routine at all, and he just like falls apart. It's like, how do you like operate in the postseason that way? And like that stuck with me because there's so many. That's the postseason in every sport. Like the stakes are higher. It's so much more intense, and like hey, you're gonna find out your game time like 24 or 48 hours before. That's gonna change some things big time.
Yeah. Yeah. What city you're going to and what time your game is, right? Like,
yeah.
I view it from like a business lens now, and it's akin to like just making something scalable. You're like, yeah, we can do this. I can call every customer myself and blah blah blah. But like, if we get to the point where that's just not going to work anymore, and how are we going to function at that point? It's the same kind of deal. So it's like when these guys get to that level, you even see it in like the college and the amateur space of you see the adjustment to the schedule of what is actually realistic. I mean, when we were in Arizona when we drafted Trevor Bauer, and he came in with all of that hoopla about his pregame routine, and it was long and it was extended, and he had a reason for everything. And I was there in Atlanta when he made his debut in the summer. He went out with his warm-up jacket and he did the full hour and a half in July, whatever it was, and he came back and he needed a full uniform change because he had soaked through everything. And I'm like, oh, we're going to see how this goes, And so eventually, you got to learn the hard way. And like until I realize that I either am going to fail because that doesn't work at this level, or that's not feasible. I don't have the time or the resources to be able to do that every single time. You may as well not have a routine at all at that point because it's like hindering you.
Yeah, he's fascinating though because he did adapt. Certainly,
yeah, he did
had a lot. That he continually. He's one of those guys. Like I really enjoy. I only got to work with him half the season. I mean, he got some legal trouble, but or some league trouble, not even legal. But he was always looking for a why and looking how that could drive him being more successful, performing better. And like I had a lot. Paul Goldschmidt was that way. Those kind of guys. They're always looking. They may have a great process. That's what separated those two guys from some other. Now, Trevor was way more analytical, but again, you're looking for that one thing that was different. They were always, just because something worked for them before, that didn't mean they were going to continue to do it. They were looking for like, hey, how can I tweak things to even get better in this area, even if they were elite.
Yeah, I think Trevor may have developed that a little bit in pro ball because he came in pretty convicted with his routine coming out of UCLA and all that, and rightfully so. He had a ton of success, and he did. He eventually had to change, and he did, and adapted, and had a lot of success at the big league level. And Goldie's the ultimate like 1% better type, where he's just got to go find something, and base running, fielding, foul pop-ups, whatever, and he's just going to get a little bit better, and he's just going to put that in his pocket and take it with him. And now I'm a little bit better in that area. And then you do that a little bit every day, and you look up and you're like, guess what? Just won the MVP.
I think, again, I don't know Tom Brady at all, but that's how I kind of looked at from afar how I viewed Brady. If he came into the league, obviously he was super late draft pick, never considered a guy that'd be, a dude. And even like when he came in, he won, he had the it factor, but his numbers, like you go back and look at his numbers, the first 10 years of his career, like he's a good NFL player, but he's not the Tom Brady we know now, and
he's winning because of the organization he's with. The organization's not winning because of him. That was kind of the narrative, right?
It was the perfect marriage,
Yeah.
but I think he depicted that really well. Like he was getting better at something all the time. Like he was just chipping away at things, and it was the true appreciation of like the slow build.
Yep. Yeah, Goldie's not necessarily. He's probably too humble and soft spoken, not soft spoken, too sort of grounded to say it. But I think Brady had that. I think Trevor had that. That chip on their shoulder. Brady came out 6th-round draft pick, the whole thing. He still does. Just chip on his shoulder. I mean, I guess he's done playing now, so he doesn't anymore. But throughout his whole career, he always kind of carried that with him. Almost as a vet.
That's emotionally affecting you.
It's not over. It's not entirely over yet. He might come back.
Bauer. So I'm in a very happy spot with you.
Yeah, you are. You guys are feeling the flow right now. I get it. Good for you.
Only 5 more to go.
Yeah, you'll get there. You guys just keep plugging away.
Like having training wheels.
I got a buddy that works for the Chiefs. I'm pulling for him. They are fun to watch. Those guys like Mahomes, like just people that do anything at a really high level. I just kind of nerd out on like watching it. And to your point about Neil, like just trying to find what is. Yeah, okay, they're physically gifted, but like, what is the separator? What do they do different? How do they do it? There's a ton to learn there. There's a ton of meat on that bone for all of us, if we're looking at it the right way.
I think, you talked about Steph Curry earlier. Like him and Mahomes are interesting to me, just like, and Ohtani's this way now too in baseball. Like they have changed the game. So, like, you talk about impact on a whole sport. Like, they've totally changed how the game is played, how, like, even players coming out of the draft now are viewed. It's crazy to see on both ends. Curry's hitting 45-foot three-pointers. And, like, people don't bat an eye when he takes a shot from half court. It's like, oh, yeah, he's probably going to make it anyway.
I know.
But I think that's, like, just in his instance, it was like the ability to be able to knock down a shot, from anywhere on the floor and not like have confidence in that. That was a whole new thing in the league. But now you have like Mahomes, like his creativity, which you would think would give rise to more people playing more sports instead of like the U.S. particularly just going the other way.
Yep.
Where it's like we're locking in more and more.
Yeah. Specialize at 7. Pick your path.
I know I've heard of some travel coaches at like 12, 13 years old. I don't know if they realize this. They're making more as a travel team coach than the majority of major league coaches that aren't managers. It blows my mind.
Well, it gets back to, I'm not saying everybody that's in that space is like this, but it's a moneymaker. It's an industry, and the fact that was just kind of starting to become a thing when I was, it wasn't when I was younger, but like high schoolish age, the travel ball thing. And it was super select. There weren't a lot of teams. And granted, I grew up in New England, but now have we gotten that much better? There's that many talented people, or are they just willing to cash your checks? So just again, be careful of like what people are telling you. Are they telling you what they want to hear? That I'll get you a D1 scholarship. Like, okay, do we got my money back if I don't? What's the partnership here? What's the agreement?
I think this model has brought up the floor of talent.
Yeah.
So but it is it's not raising the ceiling. The ceiling's still here, and we went from here now to here, but in that area, we increased. I did draft stuff for a long time, medical reviews, and it was fascinating over the course of a decade, seeing the transition from young kids coming out of high schools and colleges, where it's wow, this guy has these are similar findings on this kid's MRI or whatever his injuries to what I'd be looking at a 6-year major league free agent.
Because he's been throwing year-round since he's 11.
We should not be seeing this. I remember having a 12-year-old at the clinic one time that had blown out his UCL. what are we doing? And you know what? Maybe the kid may have wanted to play year round. I can't speak to that, but
yeah, but he's a kid. It shouldn't be his decision. Yeah. Mom and dad have to step in and say, sorry, that's not good for you. You know, and that's where it gets back to the education of finding somebody that's going to tell you the truth instead of like, yeah, you know, I just need you for 2 innings tonight, but I threw 8 innings last night. You know, like, yeah, I know, but this is the championship. A championship of what? 11-year-old fall ball? Like, what are we doing? You know, and I get fired up about this because I see people take advantage of kids. And kids are always going to want to play. The kid's not going to say, no, don't put me in. Of course he's going to take the ball. The parents or somebody has to be like, look, is this kid going to be able to lift his arm to get his diploma when he graduates high school? You know, like, let's look out for like the long-term well-being of these kids. So I don't know. I get, you triggered me there, Andrew. Don't trigger me.
No, hey, this was the perfect time. I know the College World Series just ended, but I mean, this was the perfect time because you would see kids throw 150 pitches in a game, and I can't tell you how many like great college players I saw come out that were just never the same when they got out of college.
Yep. And look, you know what? I think that's a little bit more of a nuanced argument because, look, if you're a high-profile guy that's gonna have a really good chance of getting to the big leagues, okay, then you gotta be mindful of that and you gotta protect that. But, you know, there's a lot of guys that are maybe never going to play pro ball, or if they do, it's going to be 2 years and then you're done. Like that, maybe not. They're going to be telling that story of when they threw 150 pitches to their grandkids someday. You know, so it's like those guys. It's a little closer to being an adult, but still, that's like, yeah, kids get abused all the time, and you know, it's like so the coach can get a contract extension.
Yeah, and I do think it's gotten somewhat better on the college level the last few years, but I think it's gotten far worse on the even more.
It just got pushed down. It's getting pushed down. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. All right. I'm hopping off my soapbox. Andrew, thanks for coming, man. This is a lot of fun. We got to do this again. We'll find some more topics to discuss.
Yeah. Well, as any listeners could attest, this went a lot of different directions. So
yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, absolutely.
All right, buddy. We'll talk soon.
All right, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the No One Is Watching podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe to be notified of future episodes. If you'd like to support the show, please take a second, leave a rating and review, or share it with your friends. If you're interested in similar content, you can check out my website at nooneiswatching.com, where you can subscribe to the newsletter, read my blog, or follow me on your social media platform of choice. Look, your time is valuable, so thank you for lending me some.